catchy little tune, isn't it? Hey everybody, Frank Markow here. I am your professor for this class on effective conflict intervention. Last week we talked about conflict in those vitally important close personal relationships. Well, this week we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about conflict in an organizational context, and moreover, how some of the ideas and principles and theories from the management studies and management sciences can help us understand how to be better managers of conflict. And so for some of you, this will be a review. You may have you may have studied these approaches before. If you're in our master's program, you've probably studied these before. But now we're going to sort of take them and we're going to look at them and how they impact conflict management in an organization. All right? Doesn't that sound exciting? It sounds exciting to me. I'm excited. All right, so hang on to your hat. Here we go. Now, before we talk about specific theories of management, let's set the table a little bit and talk about why conflict management in organizations is so important. Well, first of all, there's the individual cost. Conflict causes a lot of stress. It decreases our motivation. In fact, if we're in a situation that's so conflictual, we might actually quit the organization, and which can lead to career setbacks and all sorts of negative things for the individual. And if you've ever been in an organization that didn't do conflict management well, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And not only is there a cost for the individual, but there's a cost for the organization. For example, opportunity cost and absenteeism, and worst case scenario, litigation, right? When people feel like the organization did not consider their perspective or whatever, and so they go to court. And so low morale, low job satisfaction, right? These are all things that the research shows come along with a conflictual situation in organizations, and those are all drivers of poor performance, right? So if you want to have high job satisfaction, high motivation, those sorts of things, you want to be concerned about conflict management and doing it well. And moreover, managers, it's been studied, spend roughly 25% of their time managing conflicts. And if you're a manager, you probably know this. Maybe your mileage may vary, maybe you spend more time or less time. But the fact is, it takes a lot of energy and time, emotional energy, right, dealing with conflict. And so therefore, we want to become good conflict managers within our organization. And I believe that a lot of these ideas that we're going to talk about, some of these unspoken realities and assumptions about how to lead and manage, will really go a long way at helping you to be a better conflict manager. Now, why do we look at theories? Because over the last century or so, there's been a great body of research done on organizations and how they function well. And so as managers, as conflict managers, you want to understand these theories because then they help you to do a better job. Now, there's four main approaches to management theories. A couple of authors by the name of Bowman and Deal, in their great book, Reframing Organizations, came up with what they call four frames. And these four frames are aligned with classical management, human relations school, culture and systems, and power and politics. And so we're going to take a look at each of these and talk about how they help us address things like shared goals and interpersonal conflict in an organization. So hang on as we go through each of these in order. Now, the first one is classical management theory. And the features of this approach are that organizations are bureaucratic, that some of the key drivers are things like efficiency and effectiveness. It's a hierarchical way to think about an organization. And Max Weber was the first person to really articulate the foundations of classical management, of bureaucracy, if you will. Now, I know we think of bureaucracy as a dirty term, right? It sort of like means waiting in line or, rubber stamping you and saying no, right? And that all is sort of the popular connotation of bureaucracy, but really in its essential foundational meaning, it really has to do with the order and structure that an organization uses to help it do its job well. And another guy by the name of Frederick Taylor was also sort of part of, after Weber came along, he came up with what's known as scientific management. And again, the emphasis is on effectiveness and efficiency. He did these time and motion studies to figure out what was the most effective and efficient way for workers to work in order to produce the most. And think about these historically, they sort of came out of the Industrial Revolution and things like mass production and Henry Ford and, how can we make the most cars per hour? And so that whole phenomenon of the Industrial Revolution and getting people to coordinate and work effectively together was a very big deal at the time. And so labor was moving from kind of small guilds and craftsmen to everybody sort of had a specific role within an organization, right? And so you can see right away why this might have some implications for conflict management. Now, some of the assumptions here within this approach is that the boss at the top knows what should be done and he or she rules, right? So there's always somebody at the top of that pyramid, right? Think about your org chart and you've got the boss, the CEO, the senior pastor, whatever it is. And that person has the prerogative and right to oversee the rest of the organization. Communication flows downward, and that top management sets instructions and everybody does what they say, all right? So this doesn't sound foreign to us, right? If any of you have been working in organizations, which I know you have, these all sound like normal, typical kinds of organizational things. Well, before Max came along, this wasn't the case. And so now it's been so deeply ingrained that we just sort of, these are taken for granted assumptions of how an organization operates. And so with the emphasis on efficiency, effectiveness, order, you can see the potential for conflict right away, right? For example, power imbalances. Now remember early on in the class we said the higher the power imbalance, the more likely it is for conflict. And so one of the goals is to reduce that power imbalance so that we can work towards a win-win. But whenever you have this power imbalance, chances are you're going to get a win-lose, right? Okay, because who's the one that calls the shots? So that's one of the challenges. And again, we're not saying you can get rid of these things, but you just need to be aware of some of the challenges that they present for conflict. Another one are rigid communication flows, and the fact that communication tends to go this way, and it's very hard for it to go this way. And the disregard for people lower down in the organization. So if you look at the org chart and you got your CEO here and you got your vice presidents and you got your managers and you got your supervisors and then you got your frontline workers, right? I mean, there's a big difference there between the top line, the decision-making, strategic apex of the organization and people who actually do the work. And so there's a lot of potential for conflict there because those in top management don't necessarily see what's going on day to day by the frontline workers. So there's a lot of questions that you can ask yourself here. I've got more questions than I do answers on this one, but a lot of questions, and we'll take a look at these for each of the four approaches, and these will help you think through some of the issues and how these windows impact conflict management. So the first one we're going to look at are the questions about classical management theory. And let's just go through these here. Is the organization sufficiently formal for its size, or is it hobbled by outdated processes? Now, as you know, that organizations grow in time, right? And usually when they're small, there's kind of one person at the top of the food chain and everybody kind of reports to that person, right? But as the organization grows and becomes more complex, that's going to create bottlenecks, and there's going to be conflict because of that, right? And so the organization needs to restructure from time to time and come up with policies and procedures that make sense for it in this new season. What worked 2 or 3 or 5 years ago won't necessarily work in the contemporary context of the organization. So that's a good question for you to ask. Are we sufficiently formal? By formal, we mean, are things written down, right? Are they above board? Are they stated so that everybody's on the same page here? The next one is, are there clear policies that are communicated well? And are these opportunities to change, or are there opportunities to change these when needed? So this is similar to what I was just saying, right? So do we have policies, and do people know what they are? Are processes made clear and reviewed regularly? Are there good channels of communication across the organization, or is the grapevine the way people get information? All right, so you know what the grapevine is, right? So I didn't hear any official word, and so me and my friends start talking about it, and the word sort of goes around like this. And that happens a lot in organizations, right? And so sometimes people hear the wrong information. And so conflict can break out simply because there's a lack of information about what's going on. So formal communication from from leadership goes a long way at stifling people's concerns, raising conflicts, issues, those sorts of things. Some more questions here. Do meetings allow time for dealing with undecided, potentially conflictual issues? And sometimes meetings are, posed as this is an information meeting here. I'm just the boss, and I'm the boss, and I'm here to tell you what's what, without leaving enough time for decision, collaboration, for letting the voices of those who actually do the work weigh in on the process. Are there clear lines of authority and chain of command? Or do people report to multiple bosses? Now, this is a big one, right? If you have this person as your supervisor and this person, and they're giving you competing things or competing demands, there's going to be a lot of conflict between that, right? So, the classic management theory says that one person reports. There's only one person only has one oversight, right? One supervisor. And so, if you have this sort of ambiguous, well, I kind of report to him and I kind of report to her, that's going to cause conflict. Is there an agreed upon strategy that everyone is aware of and that they participated in shaping, right? So people want buy-in. People want to know what the organization is about, what the current goals are and objectives and such. And are there formal means for dealing with conflict, dispute resolution? Is there a budget for conflict issues, training, etc.? Is there somebody who serves as an ombudsman, somebody we could go to? Now, in a church context, we sort of assume that everybody's very pastoral, and so we can just talk about these things with people. But even in a church, I think it's important to have somebody, maybe, sort of the internal chaplain, and it may not be the senior pastor. It's somebody who can help work out conflict issues. And is conflict management really more of a formal window dressing, or is it effective? Now, if you're in a big organization, you probably have some sort of policy or handbook or something that says here's how we deal with conflict. But the question is it effective, and do people actually use it? It's like, oh yeah, we have a conflict policy, but nobody uses it. There's other things, right? So thinking about how to align your policies and processes with the needs of people for dealing with conflict is super important. And let me add one other thing too. I think sometimes managers they neglect the conflict underneath them, right? And people are ambiguous about their roles in terms of particular tasks. So let's just say you think your job is to do this task, but your coworker thinks that this job is to do their job is to do this task as well, right? And so there's this confusion over who is supposed to do what. Now that's a management issue. Management needs to oversee that and say, okay, you're in charge of this and you're in charge of that. Now, if they disagree, that's another thing. But if management isn't clear about who's supposed to do what, guess what? You're sort of setting yourself up for conflict. So make sure that people know specifically what tasks, not just job descriptions, because job descriptions change and there's a lot of tasks where people could, see that this is part of their job. And they might want to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure those kinds of things are there. All right, now let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about human relations theory. All right, we just talked about classical management and bureaucracy. Let's talk about human relations theory. This is a theory that the features are the focus on people, the selection of people, the empowerment of people, and the motivation of people. Right? So thinkers like Elton Mayo, right, back with the Hawthorne studies back in the 30s, he was asked to come in and do some work to increase productivity, right? So he was kind of like a scientific management guy, and the General Electric company asked him to come in and make things more efficient, right, using scientific management. And he found that him and his team would make some changes, and productivity improved. They would make the lighting better, and productivity went up. But then they would make the lighting less light, and productivity improved. It's like no matter what they did, things improved. And what they realized was things were improving because they were getting the actual workers involved in making the decisions. Can you see? Because they kind of came in as consultants, not as top-down management. And they realized, and again, today this is very second nature and intuitive, but at this point it was kind of a watershed moment, but they realized that when people are involved in the decisions, and making decisions that impact them and their work, they are more engaged and they are more motivated and they perform better, right? It makes sense. So this is kind of the key idea here, right? Is that that organizations are comprised of people who have needs, and that we need to align the organization and personal needs, right? So we have needs for autonomy and growth and achievement and opportunity and all these sorts of things, right? So the human relations school of thought, if you will, says how can we allow people to grow and to flourish here and to become all that they need to become within the context of the organization. Now, if somebody wants to be like a painter, or something, it's not going to happen in the organization. But the goal is to align the organizational needs with the needs of the people as well. Now, how does this impact conflict? Well, while this was a step in the right direction away from the bureaucratic classical management approach, it opens up doors for personality clashes, need for broader participation, perceptions of fairness. All right. So as soon as now, it seems kind of obvious, as soon as you open the door for greater participation and giving people voice and decisions and all those kinds of things, you're going to open up more potential for conflict. And these are some of the, so this is what management needs to balance, right? Now, again, your organization isn't a democracy, but there should be a consultation, right? So people need to be consulted in the decision making, right, before you as the leader makes the decision. All right, so here's some questions you want to think about in regards to this. Are incentives aligned with the organizational and individual goals? Now, let me give you an example of this one. Let's just say you're a sales organization, and your incentive system is a bonus system based upon what people sell, right? But your stated formal values are things like teamwork and collaboration and those sorts of things, right? But you reward people on an individual basis, but you talk about the necessity of teamwork and collaboration. Well, guess what? That's a misaligned incentive with the organizational and individual goals, because individuals going to work hard so that they get the bonus, right? So you want to think about what you're incentivizing, and does that incentive get people to do the kinds of things that you want them to do in terms of the organization. The next one is there psychological safety from leaders, or are people intimidated? Now, psychological safety is an important topic. It means that people feel free to voice their opinions, even if it may not, align with the party line, or maybe other people think differently. Like, so an organization that has a strong top-down management style, right, where the leaders, are the ones who make all the decisions, people can feel intimidated and they're not going to speak up. So you want to be thinking about, well, what is the climate around here? What is the attitude towards giving people the opportunity to speak up? And there's been tons of research on this, right, on the value of people participating and feeling safe within the organization. The next one is, are teams equipped to resolve conflicts, right? So, people might be coming into your organization, they don't really know, right? They haven't taken this class, right? So what are you doing to help people to deal with their own conflict? Is there ongoing coaching in conflict resolution skills? So because this is such a prevalent phenomenon in organizations, you need to do some sort of training on a regular basis to help people. And it might be formal training, like classroom thing, or it could just be on-the-job training. As a manager, you are there to help people to grow in whatever skills they need. And so one of them might be in conflict resolution skills. Okay, now the next main frame, school of thought, if you will, is organizational culture and the theories around culture. So what are some of the features of this? Well, culture has to do with your history, with your values, with your norms and assumptions, and the behaviors that shape culture. Edgar Schein is one of the key thinkers here, and Edgar Schein said something really interesting when he defined culture. He said a simple definition is the way things are around here, right? So you can have the formal statements and the formal pontifications of leaders who say this is what we're about this and we're about that. But what the culture really is how things really are. So what people really think, sort of the people in the trenches, not just the official party line, but but the way people perceive the reality around them. And so again, so this kind of shows you right away where the potential for conflict can be. Bad conflict management can be baked into the organization, right? So maybe the organization, the culture is conflict averse, right? So people don't, we just have our culture around here. The way things is that people do not deal with conflict. We tend to ignore them, right? Remember we talked about the different conflict styles, so avoidance is a big one here, and we sweep everything under the rug until people get so mad that they blow up or that they quit or something like that. Modeling the wrong approach, right? So again, because culture has to do with values and learning from other people. What leaders do to model is vitally important in terms of shaping the culture and the overall attitude and norms of dealing with conflict. So if you're a senior leader and you tend to run away from conflict, guess what the people under you are going to do? They're going to run away from conflict, right? But as a leader, if you deal with conflict, if you deal with it quickly and you have good conflict management skills, that's going to be the norm, and people will perceive that that's the way we do things around here. We don't sweep it under the rug, but we confront it head on. So some questions around this area. What is the conflict climate like? So do you have a high tolerance for conflict or a low tolerance for conflict? Do people bring things up? Are they afraid, right? Is there a lack of psychological safety that sort of permeated the organization? Do leaders model a good approach to handling conflict? What informal mechanisms are there for handling conflict? Now, again, culture has to do with sort of the way things are, and this is more of the informal organization. So you have the formal organization, right? The org charts and the policies and what we say we're about, but then you've got the informal organization, and those two may not be exactly the same. Let's face it, right? So are there informal mechanisms? So in other words, as a manager, do managers encourage people to do conflict management? You don't want people to get litigious and bureaucratic right away and say, well, you have to elevate this. If you have a conflict, you have to elevate this to HR, or you have to fill out a complaint form, right? That's getting us back to the adversary system. Remember lesson number 1 in this class, the adversary system. Well, as soon as people take it up to HR and they make it formal, it's adversarial by definition. So by having a culture that deals with conflict informally means we have open door policies, we work things out, we encourage people to work things out, we mediate between people if needed. And again, not that not that the people triangulate and bring you in and you have to play, mommy, daddy to their little spats, right? You don't want to do that. You want to train people to be effective conflict managers themselves. And what are the assumptions and expectations regarding how conflict will be handled, or if it will be handled, right? All right. And a couple more things here. Does the organization value diverse opinions or just a select few? What is the history of dealing with conflict like? Are there stories of people who were fired for disagreeing or getting into conflict? All right, so the history of an organization and the lore and the myths and the stories and all those things, those are the things that kind of set the tone for the current day. So imagine, Joe was gloriously let go because he dared to disagree with the boss, So what's that going to do to the culture? Well, so we don't talk about things, right? We don't want to be like Joe. So what are the stories and what is the history of dealing with conflict like? All right, and then the last one we're going to talk about here are political and power dynamics. And the features of this are that organizational members struggle for control over scarce resources, right? So Bowman and Deal talk about organization. It's like a jungle, right? And everybody's out there kind of, trying to be king of the jungle and get what they need out of the jungle. One of the thinkers on this was French and Raven, if you recall from our other organizational behavior class. They had the 5 points of power, right? Legitimate power, referent power, expert power, right? Resource control power. And so This is an important perspective for thinking about how people gain power in an organization. And some of the key issues here are things like competition and favoritism and suppressed dissent. And now, obviously, this is huge in terms of conflict and sources of conflict in an organization. The impact here are things like, are the decisions driven by politics, i.e. this competitive favoritism, or by stated values and goals? And how do power imbalances lead to conflict? So again, we said this early on in the class, and I just said it earlier, if you have the higher the power imbalance, the less opportunity, the less likely that you're going to get to win-win. You're probably going to get to win-lose when that is the dynamic in dealing with conflict. So here's some questions to ask in terms of your organization and how power and politics impact the conflict. Is there competition for resources or influence amongst individuals or groups? Is there a high power distance and status differential in class? Do leaders or managers play favorites, creating perceptions of bias and unfairness? Yeah, we all have a very keen sense of when things are unfair. And so when managers, and not just managers, but other people in the organization do power plays, and they manipulate things, right, in order to get their way, and it kind of leaves us out, that's a big sore spot and a source of potential conflict right there. Is there a high reliance on hierarchical decision making that sidelines diverse perspectives? Are individuals or group leveraging informal networks to gain power and influence? No. So again, power dynamics don't have anything to do necessarily with the formal hierarchy, right? That's the classical management approach, where we assume that this person is the most powerful, but that doesn't mean other people don't have power and that people lower down can have a lot of influence. So let's just say you're down the line and you knew the boss from back in the day, or you play golf with him, or you do whatever with him or her. So that's going to give you more power now because you have access to the top leadership. So again, this will get some people mad because you're influencing things, not because of your role in the organization, but because of your networking and sort of this informal influence you have over key leaders. And is information intentionally withheld or manipulated to maintain an advantage? Now again, one of French and Raven's 5 points of power was information control. And so sometimes people will hold on to information in order to be more powerful themselves. And so this can create a conflict. Well, why does that person, how come they're not sharing that with me? I need to know that information too. Some more questions here. Do political alliances form that undermine teamwork and collaboration? Are decisions made based on political motives rather than organizational goals? Is dissent punished or discouraged, creating a culture of fear or suppression? Oh, wow, that's a big one. Are conflicts escalated due to ego-driven power plays or lack of humility? Does the organization reward those who navigate politics well, even at the expense of others? So this is kind of that mismatch incentive, right? So people, if they're good political players, they're rewarded within the organization. All right, so what are some practical applications here for conflict management? Well, first of all, you want to do things like assess the structural fit and policy clarity, getting back to this classical management idea, right? Is it clear where people fit in their roles and responsibilities? Am I, as a manager, making sure that it's clear, right? That there's no ambiguity over who has to do what task, so these people aren't left to conflict over it? Do we update our policies so that they make sense for this current season, right? Or are these just kind of leftovers? Are we being hampered and opening ourselves up to conflict by not updating and revising policies and procedures from time to time? Enhancing upward communication channels, right? So does the information just flow one way, or is there a way for people to get information up the food chain, so to speak? Recognizing informal group dynamics, fostering psychological safety and encouraging participation. So again, as a leader, you can do a lot towards this, encouraging psychological safety. I wrote a whole section in my textbook on that one. But that's important. And then watch for political motives and behavior that can lead to conflict. So if you're a manager and you see people politicking and those sorts of things, or kind of doing end runs, or collaborating to get the way of a group or whatever, you need to be aware of that, and you need to step in, because again, that's going to create some dissent and conflict at some point down the line. Well, that's about it for today. Thanks so much for listening. I hope this was helpful. And again, this topic, of management theory, I just kind of did a whirlwind tour here, but I really encourage you to do some more research on all of these approaches, all of these frames, if you will, because it's going to help you in conflict management, obviously, but it's help you in a lot of other ways. So if this was kind of a new, these were new ideas for you, I encourage you to do a little more research, and then through our conflict management lens, think about, all right, how are these things either helping or hindering our organization be better at managing conflict? That's it. God bless you guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.